Why don't more infant formula companies use organic, grass-fed whole milk instead of skim? Why don't more infant formula companies use the latest breast milk science? Why don't more infant formula companies run their own clinical trials? Why don't more infant formula companies use more of the proteins found in breast milk? Why don't more infant formula companies have their own factories instead of outsourcing their manufacturing? We wondered the same thing. So we made ByHeart, a better formula for formula. Learn more at byheart.com.
Hello and welcome to mini episode 351 of Real Life Ghost Stories, and I have 4 spooky stories for you today, and the last story comes from March the 30th, 2024, and story number 1 comes from Claire. I have had a lot of experiences with ghostly goings on and unexplainable events. I was definitely a creepy kid and came from a spooky family, so no shocks there. When I was young, before I can remember, I used to speak to dead people a lot. My parents moved house when I was a toddler, and I used to speak to the man in the hallway. A few weeks after moving in, an older gentleman knocked on the door and explained to my parents that his friend had died in the house before they had bought it, and he was found in the hallway. Needless to say, my parents already knew something was up with me talking to someone who wasn't there. I will absolutely swear that I floated down the stairs too. I can remember going to jump from the top and just floating down them. I've had lots of experiences, some of which I'll talk about in another section as they were in a specific house. But this one sticks with me so vividly. I lost my first child when I was 16 years old. Myself and my partner were devastated despite being so young. We're still together now, and this has impacted us for years. We went on to have another loss a year later and now have 2 beautiful girls earthside. I was in my mum's house and went upstairs to use my brother's computer. These were the days when apps on phones weren't really a thing. My eldest daughter was around 5 at the time. It was the anniversary of the first loss we had suffered, and I can remember the event so clearly. My daughter was running up and down the stairs, and I had told her not to more than once as I was afraid that she would fall. Once again, a little girl ran up the stairs and past the room. I automatically shouted to my daughter to please stop running up the stairs, to which my mum shouted back that she was down there with her. With this, I realised this little girl had long dark hair with a fringe like I had when I was young. My daughter at the time was blonde with a different haircut. I've had so many experiences where I've seen children, lights flickering, and when I've answered asking my grandparents to stop, they've stopped doing it. As I'd mentioned, I have 2 daughters, one now aged 18 and one toddler. Yes, we had a big age gap. When my oldest was around 2 or 3, she used to see things and speak to grandparents who had passed. She also used to tell us about her past life and give us names of our family which were really unusual, think Game of Thrones style, and there was nowhere she would hear names like that to copy them. She told us how they had all died and that she had chosen us to be her family. My toddler now has also started to see things. She is a Velcro baby and will want to be with us all the time. She was playing in our house one day last week and suddenly ran up to me saying, "No, no, no, no," and buried her head in my chest with her hands literally clinging to me. She looked as if she was hitting something at one point. She eventually looked up and peeked through the door to the hallway and went as if she was looking for someone. She then said, "Gone," and just carried on with her playing. She stopped suddenly a few times and looked at certain areas of the house while babbling. She's also hidden her face against me while in bed saying, "No, no, no, no," and looking around the room afterwards. She can't tell us what she sees, but I am sure that she is a creepy kid. My family are all quite creepy. My mum has seen so many of her dead relatives. She saw her grandmother through the glass in the door we had going to the hallway and just said, "Ruby's died." A few minutes later, we had a phone call to tell us that she had passed away. She's also had vivid dreams about dead relatives in coffins and finally sees them out and about, and then the dreams stop. My nan and auntie are also quite spooky people and just seem to know things. My brothers were always creepy kids. I'm the eldest of 5. The one brother in particular I used to look after a lot when I was a young teenager. He started telling my parents the man upstairs on the landing was scaring him and that he didn't like his hat. On one occasion he asked me to tell the man sat by the fireplace to go away as he was scaring him too much. Safe to say we left the house until my parents came home not long after. Both of my youngest brothers were in special care when they were born. When my youngest brother was born, there's a photo of my brother looking into his incubator. The reflection looking back is of an old man. My stepmother swears he looks just like her grandfather. There's so many stories from siblings but too many to go over. My parents' old house was extremely haunted. My uncle died when he was young and we'd seen a medium who had told us all the things that were happening in our homes and said not to worry, it was just my uncle. Window nets would fall down even though the pole physically had to be lifted up and off the hooks. Keys would go missing and we'd suddenly hear a clatter and see them swinging from the metal saucepan storage shelves in the kitchen with the ring having been opened and wound onto it. Pictures would move in our house and my grandparents every morning without fail. Me and my friends would have sleepovers a lot and we slept on the sofas downstairs. At exactly the same time we both sat upright gasping as we'd both felt a presence looming over us. I can only describe it as black and white, but I know my eyes were closed the whole time. There were a lot of spooky goings on which subsided when my brothers got older and my parents moved house. My dad's company rented a few houses out a few years ago. One of the houses was being put up for sale and my oldest brother was helping him clear and paint it when it was empty. He is very sceptical, but even he couldn't explain the things that went on there. People calling his name, crying and general spooky goings on. When he was done, he took some photos of the house. One photo in particular was taken from the back of the house looking at the window. There's an old man standing there as plain as day. I've attached the photo to this email, but it may not be the best quality as I can't find the original one on his old phone. It was a long time ago. I'm a midwife, and most people wouldn't think of maternity wards as being haunted, but it was the worst I had encountered. Before becoming a midwife, I worked as a nursing assistant on a number of wards. I worked on intensive care for 2 years, and there was the odd hearing things or shadow people, but nothing too bad. Maternity has been a different story. On the labour ward, we were all terrified of going to the toilet at night, as we all felt a massive sense of dread in that area. It's where our theatre was, and we all freaked out there by night. It was just the most awful feeling of heaviness and sadness almost. There was one room on the labour ward right by this area which was quite secluded. This is where all the mums whose babies had died during pregnancy or during labour would be cared for, so they couldn't hear other people in labour. When the room had been empty, I'd walked past and seen the curtains opening by moving along the rail, and moving a lot, despite the windows being closed and no aircon etc. being on to move them. I've also heard knocking and babies crying from that room when it's been empty. On the postnatal ward, there were so many sightings by other midwives and staff too. We had 2 single rooms at the end of the ward that were closed off by a door. One room wasn't great as it had no windows, but it was still used quite a bit as it had to be. The other room, that was on the left as you walked through the door to the 2 rooms, was the most freaky. I've seen a woman dressed all in black with her legs crossed, sat on the end of the bed in that room, as well as a few of my colleagues. I was cleaning the other room one night shift as somebody had been taken from there to the labour ward, and I heard somebody call my name in a loud whisper, to the point that I answered back, "Yes, I'm here." There was nobody there. and the main door to the 2 rooms was closed, so you can't really hear the staff on the ward. I walked out to the main nurse's station and there was nobody around who could have called me, and I would have seen them walking away if anyone had been there. The door to the room with the shadow woman was always open, no matter how many times we'd close it. Nobody could go past, and it would still be open the next time we went into that area. One of my colleagues used to see an old lady walking around in a nightie when she was working nights, and had some other visions of people around the unit. She said once she had asked to see the babies before she quickly disappeared. I don't know if being in a place where new life comes into the world made a connection to these beings, but I was glad when I no longer worked there. Oh, I don't blame you, and I see what you mean, Claire, about, people think of A&E or end-of-life care as being somewhere where there would be lots of paranormal activity, but you don't necessarily think of a maternity ward as somewhere where there would be lots of paranormal activity. And maybe, like you said, it's a case of it's a place where life is brought into the world, so therefore it attracts spirits or something along those lines. And obviously maternity is going to be a place of heightened emotion, both positive and unfortunately negative. So maybe that level of heightened energy also brings something into the mix. And it sounds like you've got a family full of creepy people. And I mean that in the nicest possible way. I mean, they do say that those abilities are generational and passed down through families. And it sounds like you and your kids and your mom and your brothers all had crazy abilities. And I will say that I'm glad that your brother told the hat man that he didn't like his hat. Because I've said it before and I'll say it again. I have beef with the hat man, and I'm glad somebody's telling the hat man, listen, nobody likes you and nobody likes your hat. I'm glad. And it must have genuinely been very comforting to have a psychic medium say, hey, all of the weird stuff that's happening in your parents' house is down to your uncle who passed away when he was young. And it must be very comforting to hear that. But I also feel like, just do nice things, like, have nice visitation dreams and stuff. Don't be stealing my stuff and making it go missing and have things falling down. I'd be like, no, thank you. No. And for those who are wondering about the picture in the house that was for sale, yes, I do have it. Yes, it has been posted on Instagram, Facebook, and on Patreon. And yes, it gives me the heebie-jeebies. It is, it's not a pleasant picture. I don't like it at all. But so thank you, Claire, for the nightmares.
Do you remember what it's like being in your 20s? I sometimes look back at that period of my life and laugh just as much as I cringe. If you do the same, then you've got to watch Queenie, the new original series on Hulu. Who is Queenie? Queenie is a 20-something-year-old living in London. She's facing all the firsts. First major heartbreak, first shitty apartment and soul-sucking job, first therapy session to work through those mommy issues. Can she turn her quarter-life crisis into a revolution? Maybe. Will she make some questionable decisions along the way? Definitely. All episodes of Queenie premiere June 7th, streaming on Hulu.
That's the sound of another sale on Shopify in store. Shopify POS is everything you need to sell in person. From payments to inventory, Shopify unites your sales into one commerce platform. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/retail23. Shopify.com/retail23.
And story number 2 comes from Anonymous. About 3 years ago, I started seeing ghosts and shadow figures and such. These sightings stopped happening a few months ago. About a year ago, I got diagnosed with severe ulcerative colitis. I've tried 3 medications and only the last of them worked. It kicked in about 4 months ago. The weird thing, I stopped seeing the figures as I started to feel better. Another thing to add is that I was being bullied. That stopped a few months back too. I haven't seen any spirits in a while. I think that the veil was thinner because I was closer to the other side than this one. Oh, I am so sorry that you were diagnosed with ulcerative colitis. A friend of mine has ulcerative colitis and I have seen her struggle at various points when she has a flare-up. So I hope that the medication is really helping you to manage that and you can kind of live a normal day to day. That would be amazing. And I'm also glad that the bullying stopped for you too. Sometimes I think maybe maybe stress for people, or people that are in heightened emotional situations can allow people to see things, or like you said, allow the veil to be thinner somehow. It's really difficult to know. And of course, it's really easy to say, oh, you were obviously ill and obviously stressed and going through a hard time, so you were seeing things, which can be quite reductive, you know. We don't know. I don't know what happens when you're really stressed. Does it make you more susceptible to, you know, seeing shadows, etc.? Whatever the case may be, I am glad that you have a medication that is working for you and that the bullying has stopped. And story number 3 comes from Xylo. I just finished listening to the first story of the skeleton key, and it reminded me of an old friend. He was a ghost or an entity, I guess. He wore a top hat as well. I didn't know about the Hat Man until years later. He didn't have a body but wore clothing. He wore gloves that seemed worn down and a suit that was also old. He wore pretty much dad socks, ones that went right up to the knees. He wore old shoes as well. He stood in between my door and my closet door, right where all the light switches were. But he had no face. I had 2 names for him, the Top Hat Man and the Thursday Man. The Thursday Man because he would always show up on Thursdays. It slowly became every other day and then every day. The first time I saw him, I was very, very young, most likely between 6 and 8 years old. I considered him a friend for a very long time, but the other ghosts that lived with me at the time were all terrified of him. I didn't understand why, but now I think I do. I would wake up with bruises covering my legs and arms, and it would feel like I was stabbed. I knew it was him as well. Eventually he slowly went away, just like how it started. He was there every day and then only some days, and then he disappeared. I've seen him around a few times, but I haven't had any bruises since he left. I have ghost friends named Jenin and Gerald. I've never told them that I've met him and that I used to be friends with him. The last time I saw him was the last time I had a vision. The vision was weird, but that's a story I'm not ready to tell the whole world. He was standing and staring at me from my room, and I was in the kitchen. I sometimes see him out of the corner of my eye, but he doesn't let me see him. I haven't seen him since the virus ended. Again, can we just have the Hat Man leaving children alone? You know? Stop standing in children's rooms threateningly, menacingly, for no reason. I'm very glad though, Xylo, that it seems that you didn't see the Hat Man in a negative way, and it didn't really freak you out horrendously, although I don't know how. You must be incredibly brave. And I can't imagine how horrible it was to wake up covered in bruises and feeling like you've been attacked. That must have been a horrible feeling. And like I said, I'm very glad that you are no longer waking up covered in bruises and all of that jazz. And I hope that you are continuing to talk to the adults in your life about all of this stuff, because it's a lot to carry on your own, you know. Being a young person is hard enough without having to carry around all this too. And story number 4 comes from Penelope. In late August, my great-grandma, my Nana, passed away. Ever since then, every time we wake up in the morning, every single light is on in the downstairs part of my house. I mean every light. My mom and my brother, he was 3 at the time, saw a person walk in front of the kitchen doorway and then turn around and walk back as if they had forgotten something. The creepy part was my brother, a literal toddler, asked my mom, "Who was that?" Now, we were really confused about this, so my mom decided to ask my uncle, who my Nana lived with for 10 years before her passing. And I'm not too sure what her exact wording was, but she got the response, she was a prankster, and she always needed a light on. So we decided to do the only reasonable thing and call her out. "Hey Nana, do you keep turning the lights on?" Sadly, after we called her out, it stopped. I think she was just playing with her power and trying to prank us. It definitely sounds like your great-grandma was making a point of making herself known after she was gone, which, as I've said, is a very, very lovely thing. Less lovely that your 3-year-old brother is also seeing whatever it was that walked past the kitchen doorway and turned around as if they had forgotten something. You know, it's one thing that when you can say, oh, it's probably my imagination, but then when a kid is like, what was that? Oh, not great. Not a great feeling, I'd imagine. Again, you know, I've said it before, I think we're going to need loved ones who have passed away to stick to like nice visitation dreams, etc. That would be far more palatable. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. Thank you to Claire, Anonymous, Xylo and Penelope for sending in your stories. Remember, the last story comes from March the 30th, 2024. And if you would like to send in your story, you can do so by emailing it to reallifeghoststoriespodcast@gmail.com. You can also check out the website, reallifeghoststoriespodcast.com. And if you are desperate for some extra content, you can subscribe to the Patreon. That is patreon.com/reallifeghoststories, where for $5 a month or $2 a month, you get access to heaps of extra content, as well as every single main and mini episode completely ad-free. And on that note, I shall see you next time.
Why don't more infant formula companies use organic, grass-fed whole milk instead of skim? Why don't more infant formula companies use the latest breast milk science? Why don't more infant formula companies run their own clinical trials? Why don't more infant formula companies use more of the proteins found in breast milk? Why don't more infant formula companies have their own factories instead of outsourcing their manufacturing? We wondered the same thing. So we made ByHeart, a better formula for formula. Learn more at byheart.com.